Welcome to the 100 Master Coaches series featuring master coaches from around the world. Let's journey together on this 100 Master Coaches series with your host, Coach Mel, MCC. Lyssa deHart is the author of StoryJacking, Change Your Dialogue, Transform Your Life, and The Reflective Coach. Lyssa is a confidence coach, certified mentor coach, coaching supervision partner, ICF PCC assessor, and coaching educator. Using her understanding of the ICF Core Competencies, combined with her knowledge of neuroscience, Lyssa works with professional coaches to expand the capacity to partner with their clients through how they show up and hold a space for those with whom they work. Now on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the 100 Master Coaches show. Today on the show, I have Lyssa deHart, all the way from Washington State. Will you give her a big round of applause? Welcome, Lyssa.
Thank you so much for having me here. This is wonderful.
It's just a pleasure. But before we go any further about your story, let me get it straight. I got a little confused with Washington, D.C. and then Washington State.
Very different. Places.
Yes, I've not been in the States too many times. I've been on the East and the West Coast and nothing much in the middle. I'm sorry.
So Washington State is very West Coast. It is right up by British Columbia.
Okay.
So we're super close to Canada. I can't see Canada from my house, but we're really close. It's like a 3 or 4 hour drive to Vancouver, which is one of my very favorite cities. And it's a very easy drive and then ferry ride over to Victoria. So we're right in that area of the Puget Sound, which goes all the way up into BC. And I live on an island called Bainbridge Island, right across from downtown Seattle. It's about a 35-minute ferry ride into the city, and then a 35-minute ferry ride back home. And the ferry ride's great, and it's a beautiful part of the West Coast.
All right, another place to visit one day, I'm sure.
On a very long list of places I'm sure you're going to visit.
Well, you mentioned a couple of it, Vancouver, Seattle. I've never been to Seattle, and Bainbridge Island may be one of them.
Yeah. Well, if you get to Seattle, you have to come to Bainbridge Island and I'll show you around. But Vancouver's amazing. It's just one of my favorite cities.
Well, we'll get there. Again, welcome to the show. We often ask this pre-question to your coaching life. What happened before coaching?
Well, a lot happened before coaching. So I had gone, ultimately my story it has a very interesting, journey in the sense of I started off an art student and I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts and a minor in art history and a minor in art anthropology. And I basically didn't know what I was going to do. And I was waiting tables because, I had graduated with an art degree. And so I had a sort of an interesting epiphany that happened for me one night while I was waiting tables, which was, I want to ask a more important question than how would you like that cooked, or do you need anything else, or what kind of dressing, or can I get you another drink? I really wanted to ask more important questions than that. And so that led me to go, well, not attached to this art thing as a career. That's always going to be a part of my life, but I'm very attached to asking this more important question, which led me into my master's program, and I went into social work. So I got an MSW in social work back in the 90s. And that was at a time when coaching was really just sort of coming into fruition. Honestly, my mother actually got a coaching certification in the 90s.
Wow.
And I was like, that's just the silliest thing I've ever heard of, because, well, I'm a social worker now. Why would I ever want to be a coach? That's crazy. And so I started my career as a social worker, working with families, working with short-term, goal-oriented, solution-focused methodologies.
I get it. I get it.
And then I went from working for the state to working for the military. And then my husband was in the military. So then when he retired, I had an opportunity to work on a private practice. So my trajectory went into private practice as a therapist, and I was taking insurance, and I was seeing lots and lots of clients and doing a lot of work around trauma, PTSD, dissociative disorders. And in 2012, my husband had this opportunity that came up that was like, hey, we'll pay to move you and all your stuff up to the Seattle area for this job. And he said to me, what do you think? And I had been at that point doing trauma work and family maltreatment issues for 20 years. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so I shut down my practice and I moved up to Bainbridge Island, and then really basically had a complete identity breakdown as to who I was and what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I had taken a coach training, actually. David Rock had he had a results coaching at one time, and then it's changed to neuro leadership. But my husband talked me into taking that back in like 2007, I think. And so we had done our original coach training with the David Rock program. Because I love neuroscience, and I thought, well, maybe this coaching thing, there's something to it. And so in 2014, I'm sitting here on Bainbridge Island going, oh, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, maybe I'll check out this coaching thing again. And I knew from the original 60 odd hours that I had, I think 65 hours of coach training that I had in 2006, 2007, 2008, whatever that time frame was. I didn't really understand coaching. Like I knew that, like I had a minor framework, it's sort of loose and kind of loosey-goosey about competencies. I knew they existed. I didn't really know what they were or how to apply them. And so I decided to start taking more coach training. And at that point, I realized I never wanted to go back to therapy. Like I was falling in love with the competencies. I was falling in love with the conversations that were available through coaching versus counseling. And so, okay, I could go on forever and I'm not going to, but that was really the trajectory that brought me to coaching. And so that was my life prior to being a coach.
Thank you, Lyssa. It's just so amazing. Whenever I hear stories like yours, it just shows me again and again and again that we all come from so many different places. And the trajectory, as you were talking about, draws us to that same place, that same love, that place where we've decided in our hearts that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And when that happened for you, like, even though you've done your coaching certification, and of course, mom did it before you. First time I'm hearing that in an interview. So you're actually a second generation coach. Think about it, right?
I guess technically I am a second generation coach.
It's so amazing. It's truly mind-boggling for me, because you did it a couple of years ago, and then you still doing therapy and helping a lot of people. Something just clicked in your mind that, boom, that's what I want to do. So I'm trying to get that to that point when you like kind of like
that moment.
That's it. This is what I want. The special moments that we work with our wonderful clients, don't you think? Those are the moments. Tell us about your special moment.
I don't know that I have one particular moment where the light bulb went off and I'm like, holy cow, this is it. I'm never like, this is the trajectory that I'm going to be on. There were a lot of things going on in my life through it. And I think what I was noticing, honestly, one of the things that I was noticing was that probably 80% of the people who are coming to me for therapy were not trauma, like they were not traumatized beyond belief. Like all of the people, I had some clients that absolutely needed therapy, and the mental health issues were significant
Yeah.
severe enough they needed that sort of support. But I would say a lot of my client load wasn't that way, and in fact would have maybe benefited from my ability to be more coach-like versus more therapist-like. And I think that I had an epiphany somewhere, probably in, I don't know, 2000, and I got back into coaching. So in 2004, I applied for my ACC. I had enough hours for my PCC, but frankly, I didn't think I could pass the assessment because I didn't understand the competencies. And so I just took that time from 2014 to 2016 to really start to take a deep dive into coaching. And then I applied for my PCC in 2016. And I think there was something that happened in that 2016 to 2017 where I started to really see how powerful it was to be able to leverage the client's internal awareness, like their genius, their wisdom, to learn how to ask questions that were not leading, but rather asking questions that I didn't know the answer to, and using my experience to inform my curiosity, but not to tell the client what I thought was going on or prescribing a solution to them. And there was something in that just was like, there was this sense of partnership and freedom for me to be responsible for you, client, that just, I think my soul needed, because there was such a heavy amount of responsibility that I felt as a therapist that I was able to kind of let go of, because I could see my clients as whole, capable, resourceful, creative. And from that position, I mean, I was in partnership with them versus in a position of expert to, patient kind of perspective, right? It became much more adult to adult and much more of them leading me versus me leading them, and all the different things that, we learn as coaches. And those moments became the epiphany for me.
Yeah. Moments that shift, moments that help us realize different things about ourselves, moments that we realize that we've got to let go and let come. And I'm curious, Lyssa, when you finally let go of all of the things that you were doing, what happened inside of you?
Well, that's a big question. Several things were happening in my real life at the same time. One of them was I had both my mother and my mother-in-law living with us. And they were very different human beings. And then my mother-in-law was diagnosed with end-stage cancer. And so we went through the whole end of life with my mother-in-law. And this was happening in 2015, 2016. And so it's correlating, right, with this whole coaching journey that I'm on. And one of my big takeaways was, you don't take anything with you but your energy. Like if you're in a joyful energy or if you are in angry energy, like that's what you get to take with you. That's like it. And I was like, there's all these things. I think for me, life became this evolution of letting go. And that really aligned with coaching so perfectly. And so it's not that I don't have expertise. I mean, I've been doing work for a very long time with people. So I do have expertise. And yet letting go of the attachment of giving it to everybody, like, hey, let me just tell you what to do kind of thing. That was part of that letting go experience that I began to see as so crucially important to my own human development, because, I mean, we're all on a journey that has a conclusion at some point. And in that conclusion, I didn't want it to be like, oh, surprise, I don't get to take any of this with me. So why not start working on it now when I had the opportunity to just find more joy and ease and lightness in my life, because I wasn't holding on to attachments to things, to include my ego or my expertise or my desire to be right, which I do admit I do like to be right. But I've let go of even just, working on shedding that. And then something will come up and I have to shed more, which is really where that reflective piece in the competencies comes in that I'm very appreciative of. But yeah, letting go is just such an elemental part for me of just my own human journey.
I totally agree. It's like I'm talking to someone in a mirror. When you just said about that ego and having to be right, I'm like, okay. It kind of seems that at one point in time in our lives as coaches that will kind of spring up and hit us in the face, right? And again, it's how we respond to that. So when that happened to you, you responded in a way that helped you propel you forward. But there are some times when we kind of take that and kind of need to mull on it, reflect on it, work on it a little bit more, because it's been with us for the longest time.
Whole life, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of funny, Mel, as you say this. I was having a conversation with somebody, and I don't know. I believe there's probably a culture out there, though, to be fair, I have not met somebody from that culture personally that are not attached to becoming masterful. Right.
Okay.
I do believe there's probably one out there. Yeah. Most of us, no matter where we grow up, whether it's Eastern, Western, it just doesn't matter. Yeah. There's this sense of this, like our job and trajectory in life is to go from being a infant or a novice to being masterful at something. And that arc takes us into this place of expertise and knowing, like I know, and so we get very attached to the way we think about things, the way that we do things, the way they're supposed to be done. We become kind of binary, honestly, like this is the right and that's wrong. Yeah. It's this, not that. And there was a place, especially when I was in coaching, getting more coach education and mulling through these things, as you said, that I realized, like, I've been in this profession for a very long time. Clearly, I was steeped in it to some degree, even though my mom was more as a practicing therapist than as a coach. She still did coaching, but there was a sense of this hierarchy still existed, and I was really good at guessing. Like I can intuit pretty quickly what I think the underlying issue might be. And one of the biggest shifts for me was to stop assuming I was right about that underlying assumption I was making, even if I was, but rather use my curiosity of like, hey, I'm hearing like a kind of an underlying thread of like worry that's showing up here. And I'm curious as I say that, what does that even mean to you? Like, is there any relevance of that? And I'm probably 99% of the time accurate in my guess, right? But that piece of transparency of actually asking somebody what their experience is means that I'm not saying, hey, Mel, you seem like you're really worried and anxious. And so what do you want to do about that? I've let go of those assumptions. And instead, it's much more like, hey, I'm feeling like there's this overwhelm that's showing up, or maybe it comes up somatically, like I'm feeling like some weight on my shoulders as you're talking. And I'm curious what that means to you. And you get to make the meaning. And that was a part of that letting go also, of the not making meaning for you, to let go of the assumptions that I was so comfortable with making.
Tell me about it. I often say this: we're all meaning-making machines, right? And we
are meaning-making machines.
We do it all the time, and if we're right, we're going to make the meaning for you,
Yeah. Well, it just cuts out a lot of the wasted time of you figuring it out for yourself if I just tell you.
Yeah. So I think this is a great segue to the book that you wrote, right? StoryJacking. right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit more about where that came about.
Well, the StoryJacking really came out of, I had the two moms living here. And so my husband and I would have to go other places to be alone ever. And so we were out being alone one evening and having a conversation about what I was going to be doing with my life. And I had always felt like I had a book that I needed to write. And as we were talking, the thing that I had seen throughout my entire career was that because we are meaning-making machines, we make up meaning about everything. And then not only do we make up the meaning, once we've made meaning, we assume we're right. And that meaning is whatever true is in that particular scenario. And so one of the things that had been a big part of the work that I was doing as a therapist was starting to challenge the narratives, these internal narratives. And so I told my husband, I think it's kind of like story jacking, like, not like a jacking, like ripping a story away from somebody, but more like lifting a car up so you can change a tire and get curious about like, what the heck just happened here? And how is that story impacting you? Is it useful? Because here's the other thing, our brains have a plasticity to them, which means we can change things, like we can change wiring. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes our neuroplasticity sends us into places that aren't so useful. But it is this sense of we have this capacity to choose the stories that we're going to align ourselves with. And if one story that I'm telling myself, and when I was writing a book, and I know you wrote a book, and so this may resonate for you, but there were days where I would look at that piece of paper, that blank, empty sheet of paper, and I would be like, nobody wants to hear anything I have to say. What's the point of all this? I could just go to the grocery store and make dinner, and I'd never have to write this book again. And, so these stories would show up about like my own value and worth and voice, and just you insert whatever my insecurity or fear was. And I was like, but this is what story jacking is about. Is that story useful? Or if I'm going to believe a story that I'm telling myself, what's a better story? And not that people are going to love my book. Like that wasn't the story that I went to, but rather, hey, this is for me. I need to get this out of me and put it on paper so that I've just gotten it out of me and put it on paper. Then if it's useful to anybody, ding, 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 like bonus. But I changed my idea that everybody in the world had to love it or buy it or any of that sort of stuff. And more of like, it's going to be useful to the people it's useful to. But number one, it's useful for me to go through this process of moving through my own fear and jacking my own story along the way.
Totally with you with that. Had the same episodes of me needing to go through what I wrote and then second guess that, then coming out with something more authentic or something more Mal, and then realizing after a while, who am I doing it for? That's like you were saying, right? Actually, this was like therapy for me. This was like my 2-year therapy that I needed to go through and come out with all those narratives and face them and still be happy about the outcome at the end of the day, which is, again, starts with how happy I am with me. Such a funny place to be at, but I'm so glad that you and I have gone through that. So
it's really, as you say that, it's that self-reflective piece. Like, it's not necessarily the self-reflection in what we're writing. It's this being curious with ourselves in the moment that we find ourselves challenged by something. And then being just curious about it. Like, what the heck just happened there? And what do I want to do about it? And such impactful learning from that experience for me that still manifests itself in my life. So regardless of anybody else reading StoryJacking or liking StoryJacking or benefiting from StoryJacking, I 1000% benefited from the experience of doing this experience of writing this book. And I think that's what I hear you saying also, just like the beauty was in the experiencing.
Absolutely. And this got me thinking, right? That every coach listening to this podcast will start to think, oh, do I have a book within me? Or must it be a book, right? Can it be something else, an expression? It's just like you are fully expressed with and through your art. I know you do some beautiful art. Some people express it different ways. So I guess the question to you, Lyssa, is how do I further express that story within me through the different possible mediums out there? Again, it does not have to be a book, right? So what do you say? What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, my first thing that I would say is I would be asking a question like, when you feel most alive, what are the things that you're doing? What are the things that if you were thinking about doing them and putting the time and attention to them, there were days that I was writing 8 hours a day, and then there was days that I didn't write at all, right? And writing isn't my passion. So I want to be clear about that. I'm actually really dyslexic, so it was a bit of a grueling slog at times. But I wanted to communicate something. And so I was passionate enough about that I slogged on through. But I mean, I would say to somebody, what do you love to do? And if what you love to do is create birdhouses, like it doesn't matter, but that you then have something that you love to do. And I think all of us have some sort of creative genius in us, even if it is mathematical or if it's like tinkering with found objects. Like I was telling you a little bit about that sculpture behind me.
Yes.
It's like, it doesn't have to be like painting or photography or drawing or poetry or writing. I mean, there's so many different ways to bring our gifts into the world. Frankly, I've been, occasionally, not always, but occasionally on TikTok, I see the most extraordinary TikTokers. And you can just tell they're just absolutely loving what they're doing. And what they're doing also is useful to the world. And I think that there's a kind of a tension about where maybe it doesn't need to be useful to the world. I don't know. I probably have a bias that if I'm going to spend a lot of time and energy doing something, that I find a way to make it useful to the world. But that's just my bias. And I can see it in sports where the people become incredibly good at what they do. And then when they share their story, they lift up other people. Right. And so I think that there's that place of like, how are you going to leave this place that you're having this extraordinary experience in? Maybe slightly better than you found it. And if that's through basketball or through painting motorcycles or making birdhouses or writing books or TikTok videos, like it doesn't really matter, right? Like what matters is that you're passionate about what it is that you're doing.
Totally. And I'm gonna link it to coaching. This story about young coaches coming in, and they've got all these wonderful mentors before, just like we had. And we still have our mentors ahead of us. And they're looking at them and they're saying, oh my gosh, should I follow Lyssa this way? Is this the only path? I've got to be doing coaching this way. Or what is that I need to bring my version of my mixed bag of goodies, of gifts, as you call it, right? To bring and serve the world with it. I guess that the question is, how do you know that bag is for real, right? This is my bag. Do I have it all right now? Do I need to often open it up and let something go and bring in something new into the bag and be able to offer this as still my version, my bag to my world? What are your thoughts on that?
Marie Kondo springs to mind. So I think we do have to kind of open our bags sometimes and look at what we've filled it with and see if it still sparks joy for us. Because there are things that sparked joy once, and, for me, they no longer spark joy. And so my husband and I have just purged our house of all the things that we got from all the moms and, years of things that we've seemed to have accrued. And so we're getting rid of like a ton of stuff. And I think it's the same thing with coaching in the sense of, first off, I think of it from an art perspective also. Like you think of a masterful painter, like, I don't know, who's your favorite artist?
Oh,
Like
wow.
just one,
Okay,
even though you may have more
let's
than
just
one.
say Monet.
Monet. Okay.
Yeah.
Monet is a great example. So Monet didn't become Monet in his first painting, right? Like if you start looking at the early work of Monet, Monet was going into the Louvre. He was going in there and he was
That's
copying masters. He was learning line. He was learning dimension. He was
That's
learning
true.
Perspective, color, light. Like there were all these things that were going on. And when you look at some of the earliest of his work, the line drawings, things like that, you can see a person learning a craft, right?
Yeah.
And then once he really understood the fundamentals, especially in when you're looking at something like, Monet's work and the Impressionists, he's learning the fundamentals of light and how light hits objects, right?
Yeah.
And he starts to see the world from a perspective that's different and unique, but he understands the fundamentals of how light hits objects.
Yeah,
right. And so I guess I would say to a new coach is like, one of the things that I think so many of us want to do is we want to bypass all the work of learning the foundation. We're ready to break rules, like abstract art. Like, why can't I just do something like Picasso did and it would be just as good as Picasso?
Yeah.
Well, put in the work of the fundamentals so that when you create your Picasso, it comes from your unique perspective. There's an authenticity to the experience. I mean, Picasso went through the Spanish War, he had a perspective that was his, but he also fundamentally understood the basics, foundational ways of creating art. Like that was not, he didn't bypass it. He was in fact incredibly rich in the teaching of those fundamentals. So I guess I would say, it's kind of like climbing a ladder. You don't go from the bottom rung of a ladder to the top rung of a ladder in one step, right? That's very unstable. And most people can't sustain that, because they fall and then they break their leg and then it's very hard to, get up and climb a ladder again. So there are these steps. I don't know what they are for each individual person, but in anything that we're doing, if we really want to do it well, we learn the fundamentals and then we get to start to explore and play with the different things that show up for us as important, and whether that's reading energy and somatics, or whether it is listening for language, or whether it is really noticing just tonal changes that are happening in a conversation, or really getting clarity around what's important to this person. Like those are things that that becomes part of how we show up with people. Right. But I do think that there's a fundamental piece that's crucial to have really fully explored in order to have the freedom to understand the playfulness that you're bringing. Right. And to also have the confidence, because when I meet coaches, new coaches, there's often, not always, a lack of confidence. And I think the lack of confidence comes in two ways. They're trying to do it perfectly. Which there is no perfect coaching, and they're not willing to sit in the discomfort of learning the fundamentals, right? And that's at least been my experience of myself, even in this process of becoming a coach.
Absolutely. It's that whole bit that you're saying that we go through in life, right? Both sides of it, almost every day, if we wanted to. How are we choosing to face those areas that's going to keep us in a place of discomfort? Because those areas would often just bring out something else. When we choose to face it.
And just real quick, I mean, going back to something we were talking about earlier, in this expertise and this ego that gets really attached to knowing things. I mean, I spent 20 years of a career becoming an expert in something. Moving into coaching, I was invited nicely to let that go. That was not comfortable.
It wasn't. Oh, wow.
That was like, no, I spent all this time becoming an expert. What, you want me to be a novice again? I mean, it isn't something that we traditionally go, yay, I get to be in beginner's mind. Like, we'll say that stuff, but doing it is like a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah. Congratulations on going on to this other lane. I often like to consider this as like we're changing, just shifting lanes. We're on that same road somewhere, but we're just shifting the lane. And you had that wonderful more than 10,000 hours expertise in that one lane. You know,
Yes,
you could just do it with eyes closed, driving on this lane, and then here, oh my gosh, you know, this opened up for you, and you went on this, and that lane became beautiful. It became something that your heart raced for. Right? It's climatic even in some places.
Yeah. Life altering, I would say.
And you know, when you were talking about the art, that story that of different artists going through their fundamentals and just growing in that stage, and it just makes it so simple. I hear you say all of that metaphorically, and it just comes like second nature to you. So I'm just curious how that skill set was built within you in the area of metaphors and storytelling.
Well, our brains are designed for stories, right? And so, I mean, you're bringing up something which is my love of metaphors, and not just my love of metaphors, just from a linguistic perspective or even from a creative perspective, but that there's a real neuroscience involved in how our brains develop the circuitry for metaphors. There are basic metaphors are idea containers, and they work cross-culturally. So one of the things that I really like about them is I work very cross-culturally with people all over the world, as do you. And metaphors, while a metaphor that might work for somebody in the US is maybe going to be different from somebody in China, let's say, but there's still metaphors in China, like, because people's brains are not that different in how they develop. And so there's 4 conceptual metaphors that are really important to pay attention to. I think there's 6. There's a whole, I could go on for hours on that. I'm not going to right now, but thinking is seeing, thinking is moving, thinking is manipulating, and thinking is eating. And so when you think of early human beings, this is the anthropological part of like brain development. But as you think about early human beings, what were the things that were needed and necessary for them to be able to survive and become who we are today? Well, they had to be able to navigate a landscape, walking through it, moving through it, but also visually, like, is that tall grass just shadow and grass, or is it a tiger in the tall grass? Eating, obviously, because, you know, a lot of our time and attention was spent on nourishment. And then the manipulation of things, the tool building, right? Like, so these areas of our brains are very hardwired into us. And so whenever we are talking about anything that is a complex idea, a belief, a value, a feeling, it often comes into metaphorical language. These idea containers are very, they're just easy. People use them all the time, and they don't even realize it, but they'll talk about, you know, I need to lean into this new way of being. Well, leaning in is a metaphor of something, right? Like, what does it mean to lean in? It's not just like, I'm not really leaning into a mindset because, you know, the mindset is in my head. But this idea of leaning into, or wrestling with their stories, or wrestling with their, you know, whatever it is that they're struggling with. The idea of struggling with an idea is in and of itself a metaphor. And so the clients, well, all of us will use metaphors unconsciously. We're not thinking about the metaphor when we bring it forward, but it is not accidental. Our brain has lit up to something that is crucially important for a coach to be paying attention to if they're really listening, because the client's brain is already lit up there. And so then it can be, so if you're, I just had this conversation with somebody a couple of days ago, and I was watching a coaching demonstration in a mentor coaching group, and the conversation, the client literally said easily 8 times, I'm lost in the weeds. I'm lost in the weeds. I get so detail oriented. I need a way out of this. I need focus. I need a plan to get things done. I've got to press send, blah, 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 blah. And they just went in circles and circles and circles. And so I said, may I, when we're done, may I have 5 minutes to play with this, because they were super frustrated, both of them, the coach and the client. And I said, I heard you say multiple times that you were lost in the weeds. And I'm curious, in the 5 minutes that we're speaking, how would you like to bushwhack through these weeds? And he's like, I want to get to the place where my head's out of the weeds. And I said, excellent. I go, so what would it take for you to be able to pop above the weeds? And he popped up and he's like, like almost like a gopher. I said, what's really showing up for me is like, you're like a meerkat. And he's like, I'm a meerkat, right? Like, and then all of a sudden his head's up above the surface and he's like looking at all the places now above the weeds where he could be focusing his attention. And,
so good.
And the thing about it too is it was so impactful for him. He even put it on LinkedIn, be the meerkat. And because it was his. Yeah. And we're playing with a really serious issue, but we're playing with it from a metaphorical landscape and languaging that is, now we're not trying to solve for the problem. Like, well, just put it on your calendar, just, make a to-do list, like just check it, just press send, like let go of being a perfectionist. We're constantly telling people to either stop something or just do it, like stop it. Whatever that is that's not working, stop it and then just do it. And it's instead, if we don't explore the client's relationship to whatever this challenge is, they cannot sustainably change the outcomes. They might for a few moments, but then it goes away. And yet now this particular person, every time he gets lost in the weeds, he's going to pop up like a little meerkat in his own brain. And he's going to now have a way of looking at the landscape and visualizing, okay, that's my goal. That's the direction I need to go. And I'm above the weeds. And you can't give somebody that. But what you can do is ask questions and listen to them and allow them to generate that from within themselves. So metaphors are powerful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love metaphors. And so I'm going to link this to the next question, talking about the future of coaching, metaphorically. What comes to mind?
Gosh, the future of coaching. I mean, one of the things that I think is really amazing is that I do think that coaching is growing. Like, I mean, in the 90s, I'm like, what do you need coaching? Like, because it was so new and I didn't really understand it. And I also, whatever that threat that I felt, I'm getting this master's degree, I know everything. So, I don't want to learn something new, whatever that all was. What I see happening now, though, is that there are more and more and more people who have a conceptual understanding of what the potential of coaching is. Yeah. And you see within some organizations, and I do think that over time, more and more organizations will begin to adopt some of these ways of being with each other because I think that I mean, organizations have to make money and they need to be able to survive, but you cannot survive if you cannot keep people. You cannot survive if you crush innovation because you're micromanaging things. You cannot, like all those things don't work so well. And bringing that coaching skill set even within to managers and to executives, so that they're inviting and engaging with the people below them and beside them and above them in innovation. I mean, innovation doesn't happen in a brain that feels shut down. It only happens when our brains feel opened up to be creative, right? That's the only time we get innovation. And yet companies are driving for innovation and then telling people to stop it. We're just going to do it the way that we've always done it. But the way that we've always done it isn't going to work for the future. It's like we're in a time of upheaval and change. And so I think coaching has an opportunity to really support people in making it through this upheaval and change, but also being better listeners, being better managers, being better supervisors, being better leaders within organizations, being better human beings. I mean, I think the potential is there because coaching is such a brilliant opportunity to link whatever the challenge is to a place, the destination that you want to go. And it's funny because people ask, like, what's the difference between therapy and coaching? And there's this sort of quick, easy, like, therapy is about the past, it's about the past, and coaching is about the future. And my thought on that is, if we're talking about a meeting that didn't go very well yesterday, are we talking about the future? Or are we talking about the past? Like, the past is relative, like it might be yesterday, it might be an hour ago, it could have been 50 years ago. It doesn't matter. But what coaching does is it takes this past experience and says, okay, yeah, that happened. What's the experience you'd like to be moving towards? And it moves the past experience into the future. There's very little that I've experienced that does that. And I think in the future of coaching, as more people become coaches, as more people understand the fundamentals, as more people learn how to be in partnership and conversation with people, whether they're coaches or not, like, I don't care if they ever, get an ACC, PCC, MCC, they're going to find that it improves their relationships, that they like their work more. I mean, that they have more joy and creativity in their life, and they have, more energy and expansiveness. So, I mean, I see the future of coaching as the potential to really support the critical changes that are happening in the world around us. None of us, like, what worked yesterday doesn't always work tomorrow, right? Like, so, like, we're all in this place of change and across the planet. I mean, COVID has really forced us into acknowledging some of the radical changes that are needed even. So I think it's bright. That long, convoluted story too. I think the future of coaching is bright and filled with potential.
Definitely. And I love what you said about the connecting the dots. It's not getting rid of the past, because the past will always be with us. It's part of us. Imagine, Lyssa, if you did not have the past that you had before.
I wouldn't be me. You wouldn't be you.
Absolutely. Right. So it's like honoring the past and being able to stand on those foundational moments in life and kind of look forward and say, hey, how can I move from this honoring to a new honoring in front of me? Right. And as I grow step by step forward, wow, the world's getting brighter slowly but surely. It just moves towards that direction that I'm not afraid anymore to take that steps and leave some of those paths behind as we mosey along into our future.
Letting go doesn't mean we forget, right? I mean, we don't have to dissociate from things that happened in our life. And yet, I mean, even as a therapist, I would just ask people, look, what do you want to do with the past? Because really, you have a couple of options. You can be stuck in it for a very long time and not go anywhere, just be stuck in that moment. Or you can learn from it and then let it go so that you can move forward. It doesn't mean it's gone, but you don't have to carry it with you forever as a defining way of being always into the future, right? Like, that's a choice, but how useful is that choice? Is that really the choice that's going to be most energizing to the kind of life you want to create. But then I also think that's part of it too, is we work on goals that are very, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but we often work on superficial goals. I want to make a lot of money, or, I want to, get that job, or I want to lose 25 pounds. Like these are goals, but people don't feel embodied by those goals, right?
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is, we kind of work on it for a while. If it doesn't work, we kind of give up and we move along. And so some of it also is like, how do we create goals that are actually big enough and meaningful enough so that we're actually like they become the umbrella or the grounding of the kind of life that we want to lead. And that may include, more money, and that may include that job, and it may include that 25 pounds you want to lose. But what's stopping you from living that life is the stuff to explore, because it becomes the overarching goal. And then if we make it powerful enough, then the work that we do all supports the larger goal, whatever that is.
Love it. The grounding up into that big umbrella, and making sure that that's meaningful to that person at that point of time in their life, as they look upon how it is will be and the stories that they will tell in the future. Lyssa, it's been a joy speaking with you today. As we bring this to a close, what would be your last thoughts to the audience today?
Get out of your own way. Believe that you have the capacity to live a life that is meaningful to you, and allow yourself to give yourself permission, allow yourself to do what needs to be done, the fundamentals to allow yourself to grow to that place that you want to be. And don't avoid those middle runs of the ladder. They're super important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lyssa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. This has been the 100 Master Coaches show today with Lyssa and myself, Mel. Till the next time, you take care, stay safe, God bless. Bye for now.
You have been watching the 100 Master Coaches series with your host, Coach Mel, MCC. Brought to you by Catalyst Coach. www.catalystcoach.live. We will be right back with our next Master Coach on the 100 Master Coaches series.